Welcome to Quick Course Digest. Today we're tackling a big one, macroeconomics.
What we're going to do today is build a mental model of the entire economy. Yeah, seriously. Think of it like getting the blueprint for a giant, super complex machine. I mean, it's a question that hits all of us, right? You see it in the news all the time. The economy's booming one minute, and then suddenly we hit these frustrating slowdowns.
So, to really get a grip on the cycle, you have to see the whole system. And that, my friends, is where macroeconomics comes in. It's all about the big picture, the entire forest, if you will, focusing on huge issues like national growth and inflation. Now, its counterpart, microeconomics, that's where you zoom in on the individual trees. It's all about specific markets and choices. Asking questions like, hey, why do those jeans at the mall cost $120?
Okay, so now that we've got the scale right, let's pop the hood and look at the core engine of this economic machine, how money actually flows through it.
Economists have this really cool model called the circular flow diagram. And at first glance, it looks, well, pretty simple. But don't let that fool you. This thing is basically the fundamental wiring diagram for the entire economic machine. It shows us exactly how money is constantly moving between all the key players.
So it all kicks off with this simple loop, right? Between two main groups, households, that's you and me, and the firms that actually make stuff. First, in what's called the input market, we provide our labor. We go to work. In return, those firms pay us wages. Then we take that money to the output market. And you guessed it, we buy the very goods and services those firms just created. It's this beautiful, continuous, circular flow.
But wait, it's not just a two-way street between households and firms. You've got another major player sitting right in the middle, the government. It collects taxes from both of us, from households and from firms. And then it injects that money right back into the flow by buying goods and services. We're talking everything from office supplies to massive military hardware, and of course, by paying the wages of all its public employees. Okay, so we have this giant machine chugging along, but how do we know if it's actually running well? We don't just, guess. We check the gauges on its dashboard. And for a quick health check, economists are always looking at three absolutely critical indicators. These three numbers give us an incredibly powerful snapshot of how the economy is doing at any given moment. I mean, we hear these massive numbers thrown around all the time, right? A GDP in the trillions. It sounds huge, super impressive, but what does that number actually mean? So gross domestic product, or GDP, is basically the price tag on a country's total economic output for a year. It's the grand total of every single final good, from cars to coffee, and every single service produced inside that country's borders. It's pretty simple, really. When GDP goes up, the economy's growing. When it falls, it's slowing down. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is a super important point. There's a difference between nominal and real GDP. So let's say the news reports that GDP grew by 5%. Great. But did we actually produce 5% more stuff, or did prices just go up by 5%? See the problem? Nominal GDP includes those price changes, which can totally be misleading. Real GDP, on the other hand, is adjusted for inflation. It strips out the price changes so we can see the actual growth in production. Honestly, it's the only way to accurately compare economic output from one year to the next. All right, our second gauge on the dashboard is inflation. In simple terms, this tells you how fast your money is losing its buying power. The most common way we measure this is with something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Basically, they create a standard shopping cart of goods and services that a typical person buys. When the total price of that cart goes up, yep, that's inflation. And the third key gauge is the unemployment rate. This one tells us how many people who want to work just can't find a job. Now, the definition here is super specific. To be counted as unemployed, you have to be actively looking for a job. This gives us a really good sense of how well the economy is actually using the people who are ready and willing to work. So a key thing to remember is that these economic machines, they don't just run at one constant speed. Nope, they have a natural rhythm of speeding up and slowing down. This rhythm is what we call the business cycle, and it moves through four distinct phases, over and over and over again. You have the expansion, that's when things are growing. Then you hit the peak, the highest point. After that comes the contraction, where things start to slow down. And finally, you hit the trough, which is the bottom, right before the whole cycle kicks off again. So when you hear that dreaded word recession on the news, All it really means is that the economy is officially in that contraction phase of the cycle. The technical definition is a period where real GDP is actually shrinking, and that almost always means that, unfortunately, unemployment is going up.
So this begs the question, right? If the machine is slowing down, or maybe it's overheating, can't we do anything about it? Are there ways to steer it? The answer is yes. And one of the main toolkits for the job is something called fiscal policy. And fiscal policy really just boils down to two primary levers that the government can pull: how much it spends and how much it taxes.
And this is a fantastic illustration of how those levers are actually used. Let's say the economy is in a recession. The government can use what's called expansionary policy. It can either increase its own spending or cut taxes. Either way, the goal is to get more money into people's pockets, encourage us all to spend, and boom, boost the economy. Now, on the flip side, if the economy is overheating and inflation is getting crazy, it can use contractionary policy. Do the exact opposite. It can cut spending or raise taxes to pull money out of the system and cool things down.
So, why are we going through all this? Why does any of this matter? Because, and this is the most important part, this isn't just some abstract theory. Understanding how this machine works has a very real, direct impact on your life.
Seriously, knowing the big picture helps you make way more informed decisions. You can start to anticipate how the business cycle might affect your own job security. You'll finally understand why your savings account seems to be losing value when inflation is high. And next time you hear politicians debating tax cuts or big spending bills, you'll actually understand the logic, the why, behind their arguments. Look, this economic machine is incredibly complex, and it's always changing. But now you have the blueprint. You're equipped to look at the news headlines and see them not just as a bunch of noise, but as actual signals telling you how that machine is running, which leaves us with a big question, right? As we face huge new challenges, things like AI and climate change, are these traditional tools we just talked about going to be enough to keep this whole machine on track?